Now, CinemaSins is one of the channels that I've been watching the longest on YouTube. I actually started back when they started and they covered the Amazing Spider-Man movie. And I've been with them ever since. It's been 7 long years of putting up with a lot. And its competitor, its contemporary, Pitch Meeting, has only been around for almost 2 years, but I've still been watching that for as long as it's been around. And they're so similar in concept, yet so different in execution, that I do think it's worth talking about, because I know there's a lot of channels out there that have talked about why CinemaSins is bad, why CinemaSins is bad. I'm stupid. But I'm not going to sit here and reiterate the exact same points that you've already heard from Bob Bids, from the Birdman, from JXE, from Sean. You know, that's just not worth it. So I will focus on what Pitch Meeting and CinemaSins do that's largely the same, but is more concise and clearer on the Pitch Meeting side, so that Pitch Meeting isn't held under the same scrutiny that CinemaSins is. Does that make any sense? I hope so, because we're about to get started. Now, Jeremy Scott, the narrator of CinemaSins, has said that his character on CinemaSins, the narrator, is supposed to be a parody of a basement-dwelling movie nerd that loves to criticize and nitpick everything. Yet his fans, well, the CinemaSins fans, anytime that they defend CinemaSins against any sort of criticism or scrutiny, is that they say that it's satire, as if satire is just naturally and innately immune to criticism, which it is in some areas, but it still comes down to the same way that you judge any art. Is it good at getting its point across? Did it do what it was supposed to effectively? That's how you judge art. Did it nail what it was trying to do? But typically, CinemaSins doesn't really pull that off because A, they mix in satirical, intentionally wrong joke sins right next to real criticism. Like, Jeremy has a bunch of running gags like, this scene does not contain a lap dance, or this character is not my wife in the scene, or something like that. And like 2 sins later, it'll be like, how did this character know that when they never had a scene establishing that they learned that fact? So if you put it right next to an example of a real criticism of the film, people can tell the difference, but largely it's going to become meaningless in comparison to all the other sins when they're in such close conjunction. Imagine if The Onion tweeted out today that President Trump accidentally took off his toupee and revealed his antenna. Right? That's obviously satire. That's something that The Onion is known for. But then tomorrow, they tweet about a forest fire breaking out in California again, and it's a real fire. Most people wouldn't think that that fire was real because it's from The Onion. The Onion has a reputation of being satire, so nobody takes anything that they say seriously, except for the people that you see on r/ate the onion. Same thing applies with CinemaSins. If they say, oh, I don't blah, 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 Prometheus school of running away from things, and then the very next scene's like, it's convenient that this thing happened this way with those characters. How are you supposed to be able to discern which sin is, an actual criticism of the film if they can all be passed off as jokes or they can all be passed off as real criticism? Some of them would be stupid if they were real criticism, but that's still very possible. Meanwhile, over at Screen Rant's Pitch Meeting, it's very obvious that it's a parody of a screenwriter pitching a movie to an executive at the studio to try to get the movie greenlit. That's the whole premise of the series. And what he does is he goes through pretty much the whole movie. Sometimes it's an old movie, sometimes it's a movie that just came out. He goes through the movie, pitching certain elements from the film that are either silly or really cool, and the exec will respond to those in a certain way. It's usually comedic. He also has running gags like, oh, this thing is going to be super easy, barely an inconvenience, or how does that happen? I don't know. Fair enough. It's like, well, isn't that a plot hole in your script? Whoops, whoopsie. But the thing is, since the entire video is a parody, everything that they cover is done in a joking manner. There's never any, I can't say there's never any real criticism of the film because they get those across very easily. But the thing is, they don't bog the video down with jokey references and stupid one-offs that are supposed to be sarcastic. the entire movie, the entire video is an actual criticism of the movie that they're talking about, but done in a comedic way. And they also, Ryan, it's pretty much just Ryan George. Ryan also doesn't pick a side. If the movie is good or bad, he leaves his opinion on that out. He'll just talk objectively about the things that happen in the movie, about inconsistencies. Like in Dark Phoenix, like these aliens are sometimes bulletproof and sometimes not. That's an inconsistency. And he's like, whoops, whoopsie. Or in Captain America Civil War, it's like, oh, I smashed all my action figures together, and that's how you got the airport fight, because that's just kind of what it comes off across as. It's a little cartoony in some places. But the thing is, you can always tell what he's actually doing. He never wastes any time with just being like, blah, 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 lap dance, or ex machina. It's always very poignant criticisms about the movie, but done in a comedic manner. And that's very important. The format of CinemaSins and the delivery of the way that Jeremy says things, it's often, as I said, hard to tell a joke apart from a serious critique. So sometimes, even when they say things that are inaccurate, like they miss a detail in a movie, or they say something wholly untrue, like when in the Avengers video they said there's no gravity in space. That's just not true. There's gravity in space, it's just significantly weaker than the gravity on Earth. But they say things like that, and it's very easy to be like, oh, they got that wrong. But whenever it's like, oh, you missed a very explicit detail from Blade Runner about Deckard, and it's like, oh, well, obviously it's just comedy, so blah. But the thing is, a lot of people don't even go that far. They'll take everything that CinemaSins says at face level and will have their opinion actively changed about a movie. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into CinemaSins comments and been like, oh, I like this movie a lot, but then I watched this video and it completely changed my mind on it. For example, I love Captain America Civil War. It's honestly still one of my favorite MCU movies. But CinemaSins correctly pointed out that if Bucky and Captain America go straight to Siberia, and then Iron Man he sends Spider-Man home, takes Rhodey to New York to get him examined, talks to Vision about it, talks to Ross about what Natasha did with T'Challa, talks to Natasha about that, then goes to the raft to talk to Falcon about any details he can get on where Bucky and Cap are, and then decides to go to Siberia. He should not get there at relatively the same time as Bucky and Captain America. That makes sense. But I'm not going to let that ruin my entire perspective on the film. And on the other side of the same token, I guess, by the same token is what I meant to say. Over pitch meeting, there have been plenty of things that were pointed out that I realized were silly about the movie, but it still doesn't change my opinion. And I've never seen anybody in the pitch meeting comments say, hey, be like, I really liked Casino Royale, but then I watched this pitch meeting video and it completely changed my opinion on the movie. That sort of thing doesn't happen because the presentation of pitch meeting doesn't take itself so seriously, and it's not so blank to where you can take everything that is said as legitimate criticism of the film on a level that you thereby have to rethink your perception of the movie. It's pretty much just Ryan poking fun at things, at inconsistencies, at plot holes, at plot contrivances, things like that. But it's never with the intention of being taken seriously as a critic. And lastly, CinemaSins seem to feign ignorance sometimes. Towards the beginning of the Infinity War video, they talk about how silly it is that the Iron Spider suit exists, because it's like, oh, you want us to believe that Tony Stark built this suit for Peter in the, I'm guessing, 2 months since Spider-Man Homecoming. That's what he legitimately says in the video. I just watched it recently. It's been 2 years since Homecoming. And also, the suit existed at the end of that movie, which was a movie that they had already sinned. It's like, are you doing it on purpose? I feel like Jeremy doesn't do any fact-checking. Like, the sins are just written for him, he just goes in the booth and speaks. But since he's the voice of CinemaSins, he represents the entire team. So if he says something stupid, the entire team looks stupid. And I get that if you spend all your time writing sins, watching movies and writing sins, it's very easy to forget things from previous movies. But if you're going to make such an affirmation as it's been 2 months since this last movie, maybe just fact check, because it's very easy to screw things like that up if you don't fact check. It's very easy, very simple, super easy, barely an inconvenience. Now, with Ryan being a one-man show, fact checking is something that, is very vital to his operation. And a lot of times, he either has just watched the movie recently because it just came out and everything's fresh in his head, or maybe he rewatched it for the purpose of making this pitch meeting. No matter what the situation, though, he never screws up vital things like that for his own jokes. Like, I mean, the amount of time that passes between Homecoming and Infinity War isn't, like, it doesn't make the script. But if you're going to call it out and then say that the movie is making a mistake, you have to make sure that what you're saying is correct. Because if you're going to judge someone's art objectively, you have to get the facts straight before you start speaking them, which is something that Ryan has never had a problem with. I've never watched a pitch meeting video and seen Ryan literally get something wrong. Maybe he didn't like a movie that I liked, and it kind of came through in some of the things that he says about the movie, but he never says anything so wholly incorrect as that. And that's not the only example of CinemaSins getting things wrong, but it's just the fact that, like, if it's that simple to mess that up, how many other sins and other videos about other movies could they have gotten just as wrong, just as easily, just by simply not doing any research? And a lot of that comes from the fact that they try to get out 2 videos every week. They try to stay topical. Like, It Chapter 2 is coming out this week, so of course they just did the first It movie. Like, they're doing all these things. They have their hands in so many baskets that of course they're trying to stay relevant by covering things that are new and fresh and relevant at that time. But it kind of hurts the quality of the videos if all you're focused on is getting the content out as quickly as possible and being as on top of things as possible. Because honestly, it doesn't matter when you cover it. You have 8 million subscribers. That video will get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views. It's not that big a deal. Whereas Ryan is like, hey, I know that It just came out, but let's do Fast 5 pitch meeting. Why not? I don't care. It just feels more connected when you're seeing one person do all the things rather than just hearing somebody narrate over clips from the movie and just getting things wrong all the time. And since pitch meeting and CinemaSins, as I said, are similar in concept but different in execution, I just felt like I wanted to do this video so that I could explain to you why pitch meeting is just more competent as it stands currently than CinemaSins, and they're the ones that pioneered this entire thing. So thanks for watching if you made it this far, and I love your faces.